right, we're going to take a look at the next section in 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st Kings 12 through 2nd Kings 10. We're going to look at the role of the prophets in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, focusing primarily on these chapters. So, where are we in this story? Well, Israel's greatest king just crashed and burned, and now every king of Israel and king of Judah, which is going to come afterwards in this story, they're going to be petty kings involved in petty squabbles, and the glory of their kingdom is going to be nothing like what we saw in Solomon. And you're left wondering, man, are these kings of Israel and kings of Judah really the ones who are in charge of the family of Abraham and God's commission to bring blessing to all nations? Well, the answer that Papa Prophet gives us in the book of Kings is no. The true king of Israel's story in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings is the prophetic word. Now, what do I mean by that? How could the word be the king of Israel's story? Well, this is a narrative about the failure of Israel's kings. And it's a failure because they did not listen to the prophetic word. They did not heed the prophetic word. And we're going to see that they're given plenty of opportunities to listen to the prophetic word because there are constant interaction in Kings between the monarch and the prophet. Sometimes it's pretty nice that the king is going to appeal to a prophet and the prophet's going to assist the king. But usually what happens is that the prophet is confronting the king for some kind of sinful behavior, and the king is going to violently resist the prophet. And we see our first example of that in 1 Kings 13, where the man of God confronts Jeroboam for creating two rival temples to rival the temple in Jerusalem in the northern kingdom, one in Bethel, one in Dan. He sets up a golden calf. This is my little cow right here. He sets up a golden calf in each of them, and the man of God is sent from Judah to confront him about this. Let's take a look. 1 Kings 13. Behold, a man of God came out of Judah by the word of the Lord. The prophet was controlled by the word of the Lord. Look how many times that phrase is used in this chapter. It's here in gray. It's just all over the place. This is a narrative which is dominated by the word of the Lord. And it says that this prophet cried out against the altar. And then when the king, Jeroboam, heard the man of God cry out against the altar, Jeroboam stretched out his hand and said, "Seize him!" And the moment he did, his hand shriveled up and became decrepit. And the man of God's he's like, "Please help my hand." The man of God is like, "Okay, fine." And his hand is healed. Now, who do you think is in control of this story? Is it the king or is it the prophet? I think the answer to that question is pretty obvious. Now, look what the prophet says about this altar. Verse 2, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David in the future at some point, Josiah by name. And he's going to sacrifice priests on this altar, and he's going to defile it. Human bone shall be burned on the altar. Josiah, hold up. Josiah, he's way down here. He's one of our good boys. And the man of God in chapter 13 is going to be predicting the coming of Josiah 300 years in the future. Let's take a look at this moment when it's fulfilled in 2 Kings 13. Actually, 2 Kings 23. So Josiah is reforming. He's doing his reform movement. He's up in the north at the altar of Bethel, and he pulls the altar down and he burns down the Asherah, and he sees the tombs there, and he took out the bones from the tombs, burned them on the altar, thereby defiling the altar. And look what it says. This whole event took place according to the word of the Lord that the man of God proclaimed. Now, this little phrase, according to the word of the Lord that a prophet proclaimed, it's going to take place all over 1st and 2nd Kings, probably something like 13, 14, 15 times. There's going to be some event that looks back to when the prophet predicted that event was going to take place. I made a chart. Take a look. Here here we are. Here's the prophecy in this column and its fulfillment according to the word of the Lord that was spoken to the man of God, or a prophet, or Ahijah, or Elijah. Again, it's all over the place. And what does this tell us? What is this meant to communicate to us? Well, I think it teaches us that the prophetic word is really the instrument that is shaping Israel's history. And it's shaping Israel's history based upon Israel's and Judah's kings' faithfulness to that prophetic word or not. Now, if the prophets are so powerful here in this story, what's to prevent a prophet from becoming just as corrupt as the kings? Well, that's what the rest of chapter 13 is about. A strange little story where God tells the man of God, all right, I want you to confront Jeroboam. And as soon as you do that, come straight back home and don't you stop for a minute. Don't eat anything, don't drink anything, go straight home. And he does that initially, refusing Jeroboam's invitation, but then another prophet says, hey, come and eat with me. And the prophet's like, okay, sure. And as soon as he finishes his meal, a prophet is going to, a lion, this is a lion, by the way, rawr, he's going to kill that man of God. And it's a really strange story. And what is it placed right here to do? What's its function in the narrative? Well, it's designed to teach us that the prophets in the book of Kings, they must be themselves servants to the prophetic word. They must not presume to wield authority over the word. They must be servants to it. So just like God is going to use prophets to evaluate kings, so God himself is going to evaluate his own prophets. And that's going to become relevant in our next examination of Elijah and Elisha. When Elijah comes on the scene here in 1 Kings 17, time is going to slow way down. Take a look at this chart I made, which looks at the kings of Judah, the kings of Israel, the number of years of their reign, and then the number of verses devoted to them. So here are the number of years. Here's the number of verses for the kings of Israel. 8 verses, 9 verses, 7 verses, 6, 2, 6, and then Ahab, 167 verses. You get to Ahab, time is going to slow way down. And it's going to do that because there's a special problem in Israel that needs solving, and God is going to use his instrument of Elijah and Elisha to solve that problem. Ahab, he's going to do more evil than all who were before him, and he's going to take as his wife the princess of the Sidonians, Jezebel. She's the worst. And as a result, she's going to bring her serving of Baal, worshiping of Baal with her from Sidon, and Ahab's going to start worshiping Baal as well. And now Elijah is sent, he's commissioned to confront this newfound Baalism in Israel. So here we have our Jezebel married to Ahab. And Jezebel, what does she do? Jezebel loves Baal. And Elijah is sent to confront this new Baalism in Israel. And in chapter 17, he pronounces a covenant curse, saying there will be no rain on the land. In chapter 18, he summons all of the prophets of Baal to Mount Carmel. He has a contest. This is an awesome chapter. And he says, stop limping between two options. If Yahweh is God, then serve him. Or if Baal is God, then serve him. The God that answers by fire, he is God. And Yahweh, he answers by fire. And then all the prophets of Baal are slaughtered. And Elijah next is commissioned to anoint Jehu, who's going to take out all of the family, the dynasty of Ahab, and he's going to eradicate Baalism off of the map. You can take a look at 2 Kings 10:28 to see that fully fulfilled. So that's a primary purpose of the Elijah-Elisha narratives here in the middle of this divided kingdom section of 1st and 2nd Kings. But these stories are operating on a different level as well. You see, Israel was looking for, waiting for, anticipating a prophet like Moses. That's what Deuteronomy 34 anticipated. That's what Deuteronomy 18 anticipated. There's going to come a day when a prophet like Moses will arrive in Israel and restore the kingdom and make Israel repent and return to their God. And Elijah got it into his head, I am that guy. I am the prophet like Moses. And he had good reason for thinking so. Take a look at this chart I have, the handout. The comparisons between Elijah and Moses. There's a million comparisons. Elijah is going to announce judgment on a king, just like Moses did to Pharaoh, miraculously going to be fed bread, meat, and water in the wilderness. I mean, that's no coincidence for sure. Both going to perform signs and wonders, both going to spend 40 days in the wilderness. I mean, the parallels just go on and on and on. So you're left thinking, man, this has got to be the guy, until we get to a strange story in 1 Kings 19, where Elijah is going to go to Mount Sinai. He's going to go to Mount Horeb, just like Moses did. And there's going to be a curious interaction that's going to happen on this mountain. It's going to involve an earthquake. It's going to involve wind. It's going to involve fire. And that's it. Take a look at the verses. 1 Kings 19. Elijah is going to travel to Horeb, the mountain of God, and he's going to enter a cave, just like Moses entered the cleft of the rock on Mount Sinai. But the thing is, Yahweh is going to ask Elijah twice, what are you doing here? Why are you on Mount Sinai? I didn't tell you to go here, and yet you came anyways. Now, Elijah is going to experience wind and an earthquake and fire on Mount Sinai, just like the people of Israel did experience those three things. But what does it say? Yahweh was not in the wind. Yahweh was not in the earthquake. He was not in the fire. When Israel went to Mount Sinai, it said that Yahweh descended on the mountain with fire. And then this is the real clincher. With Israel, when they were at Mount Sinai, after this grand theophanic display where Yahweh descends on the mountain with fire, it says that Yahweh spoke to Israel and established the covenant. Take a look at a couple of verses that highlight Yahweh speaking. On the day you stood before your God at Horeb, Yahweh said to me, gather the people so that they may hear my words and fear me all of their days. Down to 32. It makes this emphasis again. What great things has ever happened or was ever heard of? Did any people hear the voice of God speaking to them out of the midst of the fire and live? Now, rhetorical question, no. Deuteronomy 5:4. Yahweh spoke with you on the face to face at the mountain out of the midst of the fire. Now, what's going to happen in our story in 1 Kings 19? After this display, after the fire, in which Yahweh was not in the fire, what happens next? The sound of a low whisper. King James is going to say the still small voice. It's so precious. Now, what this actually means in Hebrew, though, is a little bit distressing. The sound of a low whisper. Kol, let's see, damama, daka. Sound of a low whisper. What it actually means is the sound of a thin silence. So right at the moment when you would expect God to speak to Elijah, what does Elijah hear? Nothing. He hears silence. The sound of silence. So what does this mean? I mean, all those things. Even though Elijah looked like the guy, he looked like he was checking all the boxes. He's the prophet like Moses. 1 Kings 19 is there to say, Elijah is not our prophet like Moses. We are still looking for another. But then why would the author spend so much time on this comparison between Moses and Elijah, bringing up all of these comparisons, how they're so similar? Well, he brings this to our attention because he is intending to instill hope, to prime the pump of hope for the coming Messiah among the exiles. The Messiah is coming, and when he does come, he's going to be so much like Elijah. He's going to do all these signs and miracles like Moses, that he's going to be even greater. So we know that Elijah wasn't that prophet like Moses, but that prophet like Moses has come. And what's his name? His name is Jesus of Nazareth. Take a look now at the New Testament with me. Acts chapter 3. Peter says that Yahweh will raise up for you a prophet. Well, this is Peter quoting Moses. Will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. And God has raised up his servant, and he sent him to you first to bless you by turning you from your wickedness. That prophet like Moses has come, and his name is Jesus.